Okay, thank you for taking time to meet with me today.
Oh, that's very interesting of you to say. Thanks.
You said words. Thank you.
Uh-huh. So, why do you make your work? What purpose does it serve to you, and what purpose do you hope it serves to others?
Well, at least in my own, for my own purpose, a lot of the time it's to share my own narrative of my own experience because of the fact that we do a lot of spoken word monologues and dialogues within our music. Its main operative purpose is to try and provide a means for us to share our narratives, share our experiences. Alex, what would you have to say about that?
Well, what was your question so I can be specific and focused?
Why do you make your work for yourself and for others?
For myself, I don't know. To me, it's really hard to be able to find like spaces where people are openly requesting that you're able to express yourself in whatever manner you see fit, right? There's an obvious power dynamic that happens when you're able to kind of create your own forms of works. Like, we're going through college and throughout all the institutional shit that we have to deal with, like, people tell us like what direction we need to take things in, what it needs to focus on, how it operates, and there's always a form of like creativity that happens through like us being able to create our own forms and use our autonomy to whatever, in whatever way we see fit. When Drew says things like, it's a way for us to express our narratives and to create like a dialogue within music, that's definitely like the personal reason. But I guess for me at least, the reason that I do it and what I hope others can gain from it is a sense of, well, I guess my hope is that when people listen to our shit, they just don't really feel, or they gain a sense of confidence when it deals with themselves. Like, they can see the kind of shit that we were doing, regardless of whether it's silly or serious, and they can believe that they also have things to tell and express in whatever way they want, and they should be able to do that, because if two jokers like us can get up on stage and do what we do, pretty sure they can make something like 10 times better.
So it's about self-expression for yourself and the inspiration of self-expression in others.
Yeah, I would go so far as to say that we exhibit an element of exhibitionism sometimes when we perform to the point where, say, our first show, we reenacted a domestic violence scene. It's and that served an artistic purpose, obviously, to juxtapose, the public setting, the public space with a very intimate and violent space that usually happens in the privacy of one's home. And also to make statements about gender identity and to make statements about the power dynamic that exists within those agents of socialization. But additionally, when it comes to the performance itself, the personal reason for me to do these things and to make these types of performances the way they are is, for one, it's selfish in a way because I want to express my own misgivings and my own pitfalls and my own struggles, while at the same time we try to make the space interactive to the point where audience members, if they're watching our shows, can express the same catharsis that we are, or possibly that they can express whatever it is that they're wanting to express through our process of almost like opening up the space, trying to lift the social mores that kind of preside over us so that we can have a more interactive and more fluid type of exchange of ideas.
Yeah, and then on top of that, we can talk for hours about all the justifications for our work, but let's not kid ourselves. It's also probably because we're really bored and because we simply can.
Yeah,
I think a lot of the time, especially when people ask like, well, what kind of music do you make, and what would you classify it as? It's like, I don't really see why that matters, because I'm just doing shit, and you're either gonna like it or you don't, and that's okay because I'm doing it because I think it's fun. It does obviously serve a political purpose. It serves a like selfish purpose. It can also have a selflessness purpose, right? But we did it,
Yeah.
and we got there. So
yeah,
like,
and and also, I mean, another thing to add on. I don't know if we've talked about this before, but it also serves as a means of satire to a certain extent. Which, I mean, satire is the most common vehicle of social commentary within the 21st century as of now. I mean, satire seems to permeate every medium of art, which is kind of strange to think. And I don't know if that necessarily makes us unique at all because we're accessing that vehicle of expression, but we definitely do utilize satire as a means of getting the point across on certain issues.
It's also to make fun of ourselves.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? Like
Absolutely.
when we're criticizing structures and we're criticizing institutional logic and all that stuff, Drew and I come from a really similar understanding that just because we're able to criticize does not mean that we have somehow escaped those forms of logics, right? Even when we deal with forms of like gender identity, and we can deal with different violences that come from cisgender structures, that deal from heteronormative structures. The fact is that we're still both white. We're still both within a college town that seems to be a little more prosperous than shit that you would find within inner cities like Chicago and shit. And so while we satirize forms of like capitalism that can lead to violences within those areas, and we satirize forms of like anti-blackness that can function, we also realize that our position itself is able to prop up those structures. So by us criticizing that, we're also criticizing ourselves, and that, I guess, to me, is the most selfish part of it, because a lot of people believe that when we come into these places and we just kind of do our works, and a lot of people believe that like we're trying to be like these white saviors, or somehow we believe that we've transcended this shit, but really like, I think the most effective form of criticism is to have that form of like self-reflection. And when we are able to kind of understand that and express that through vibrations, that's kind of what helps me further that narrative about like what is my position as an individual within the institution, what is my position here within a bar that is full of white males that are drinking PBRs, that is probably going to go ahead and sexually assault some girl that comes to our show, and then have that flip on us by saying like we're ruining DIY scenes.
Yeah,
because that happens all the time. Like,
yeah,
it happens a lot, and so like I don't want to say that like we create a safe space, because obviously no space is safe no matter what we do, but I find it good knowing that I can at least acknowledge that shit and do whatever I can in response to that.
well then at least we're trying.
Yeah, at least we're trying. That's really the mantra.
Yeah, we're trying to promote something better, even though we know that we exist in a vacuous world. I mean, I guess we're trying to hold on to ideals that might not necessarily manifest, in the world at large, but we're trying.
They can manifest through our instruments.
I hope. Not really, no. Anyway, I'm sorry. That went on for a while.
That's fine. So obviously the concept, the more abstract components of your work are very important to you, but would you say that the abstract parts of your work outweigh the more technical parts and the creation of the music? Which part is more important to you, or maybe which part relies on the most effort?
Well, on the musical end, a lot of the time, Alex and I kind of just have a fluid chemistry of how we interact with the musical materials. A lot of the time, what we do, like in terms of the process of writing music, is to, just sit down and experiment with certain, scales, certain chords and progressions and things like that, which is pretty common. But I feel like the importance aspect of, trying to create this dualism between whether or not the music is more important than the concepts, or the concepts more important than the music. It really just depends on what time or what process we're currently in. So if we're writing music, if we're writing songs, or if we're recording the album that's going to come out soon, then the music's definitely more important. But if we have a performance coming up and we're brainstorming concepts and ideas and expanded media things that we could possibly do, then the concepts are very important, but they need to be they almost need to be like embroidered in with the music itself, so that could be contextual.
Yeah, and I guess for me, the probably most simplest answer to that question is that it just depends on what's going on that day. This is something I kind of respect about Drew, just with him as a musician, because I've been in a lot of different musical acts, and I've always wanted to be more of like a performance, like a performance-centric kind of musical artist. But the thing that I like about Drew is that if it's just a day where I'm feeling really shitty, or where we're both feeling kind of powerless or angry, and we just kind of want to express rage, sometimes we'll just be like, we've done like 2 weeks where we've been practicing these songs and trying to figure out what we're gonna do, and then like 5 hours before the show, we're like, fuck that, let's just scrap all that. How about this? And so it's very organic in that instance, because we just kind of like, if the point about the like, I guess, more abstract parts of our performances is meant to be more about that whole focus about self-expression, then I think it's really important that we try to make that expression as organic as possible. And Drew and I, through like our fluid chemistry, as he calls it, are always able to adapt to that and to be able to nail it in a way that we like literally every time. I've never been sad about any performance that we've done. Sometimes we've done 30 minutes of just nothing but music. Sometimes we've played like 1 or 2 songs and the rest of it was just performance. But in both cases, because of the way that it felt and because of the audience, because of the space, because of where we were occupying ourselves in our own minds, it seemed to always fit. And that's something that I really respect.
So,
Zach.
You can keep going.
Well, I guess the last thing too is that there is no like level of priority or importance, because both of them constitute the other, right? We use our performances to be able to formulate our songs, and our songs and vibrations are therefore able to kind of like modify our performances. So there can never really be a separation between the two, because they both mutually constitute the other.
So you described an organic writing process based on your own social interactions with each other. Is that the only way? It's obviously not the only way, but how does the social aspect of writing fall in or fit with the social aspect of performing? Does community or any sort of other social construct maybe inform the way you perform or inform your writing process?
Well, in terms of the community contingency of your question, the process of us writing music is absolutely contingent upon some type of ethereal subconscious perception of some type of community. I mean, we're always resting within the illusion of community existing in the back of our minds, and that we're somehow engaging with a anonymous conglomerate of hypothetical people, which then shape our influences. So I would definitely say that we're no less a subject to that than anyone else, but we have certain influences. Like, say, Alex is a little bit more influenced by post-hardcore and emo acts, and I'm also influenced by emo acts as well, but also a little bit more on the avant-garde side and things like that. And so there definitely is an element of expectation with how we approach the musical material and how we develop it in terms of a stylistic approach. But also when the part of the question that you asked about like setting and stuff like that, like that definitely does play a huge part in how we conceptualize our work. Like, in how we, like, when we're writing a song, oftentimes we do take into consideration the venue, or possibly, trying to escape our own subjectivity, trying to use the sociological imagination to try and view what the audience might be thinking at any given time during our performance. So we definitely do try to incorporate that as organically as possible. because we wouldn't want to, write a song to where people are turned off by it, and at the same time, I mean, we want to access a form of criticism that gets people to think and is possibly dissonant enough for them to be interested. But at the same time, we don't want them to be completely shut off to an idea simply because it was so blatantly in their face. And we want to try and be as commensurate with the audience as possible. Even though we're trying to be critical and trying to be experimental and at times dissonant, we're trying to create a middle ground between avant-garde criticisms and music that people would want to listen to for enjoyment. We're trying to hybridize those things and trying to do all those in the consideration of the people that would be listening to our music.
Yeah, and I guess to me, when it does that sense of community, especially when it deals with artistic mediums like music, it's really important that people are able to have like their own interpretations, right? I think a really important aspect of art is the fact that like if it is vague enough and if it is opaque enough, people are able to look at it and have like a psychological investigation within themselves about like what does this piece mean to me? Why am I here? What is going on around this space while I'm listening or watching or looking at this like artistic medium? And so when Drew talks about that like that middle ground between like music and avant-garde criticism, I would even take it a step further and be like, there's also that middle ground that we try to reach between those different forms of criticisms, right? Where we have like that such postmodern, super abstract forms of expression, but then we also inject it with dialogue so that you can kind of like guide it. I think that for us, the middle ground is to be able to open up a place where people understand the subject that we are criticizing, but we do not tell them like what we are advocating for or what direction they need to take it in, right? So that they can have like their own opinions and ask the types of questions that we ask ourselves continually every day, which is like, why am I here? What places do I occupy? What structures am I helping prop up or destroy because of what I'm doing in that space, in that time, in that place? So in that sense, I think that is how we are able to interact with a sense of community, right? Where people are able to come together in a place, usually young people, because it is a local music scene. We are young, we have friends that are young, and they have a bunch of angst, anxiety about the world and the future, and because they're related to us in some fashion, they probably have some sort of like revolutionary potential. They want to be able to express power in some way because they feel powerless. And so it is like our hope to be able to kind of flip the script of these spaces where it's not just a person, we're not just a group of people that come on stage and play musical instruments and create vibrations that are exactly the same every time so that people can just simply listen to music. We want to make it a lot more political and a lot more powerful for these people, which is, why we probably inject a lot more performance into our work than some. Because we find the music, while it is important, I think the most important part for us is to make that space as political and as powerful as possible for other people. Because we don't want to be leaders.
Yeah, and if we can access that through music or through performance art or through a multimedia approach, then we'll do that. I mean, the precedent that we're trying to set really is one, that of a political space or politically charged space, actually. One that gets people engaged and gets people criticizing certain current events or certain structures that they occupy. But also, I mean, another aspect of that as well is that when the performance art and music work in tandem with each other, we're trying to access, like Alex said, a form of psychological self-criticism, which can then prompt political response. So, I mean, and I guess that kind of ties into one of your prior questions, is that in that, you're asking about the dualism, whether or not, concepts or abstract expression is more favorable over music. And if anything, we're trying to utilize those two things for the same end, which is for criticism, for political activity, and for people to investigate themselves. I guess the reason why we do that is because we have a constant, scrupulous, self-analytical personality. We are constantly analyzing our own behaviors, our own interactions, and our own existential quandaries to the point where, I guess, the findings that we end up receiving through that, we want other people to share in that experience, whether or not it might be dissonant. We want them, at least we want the audience to be able to experience that kind of internal turmoil for a little while, so that way maybe they can know themselves a little bit more.
Okay. Would you consider yourselves artists or creative people, or both, or maybe neither, or something else?
This is your question.
Well, me, I would not consider myself creative. I would not consider myself something that is like to me, the thing is that I like everybody has the same potential to be able to create and destroy through like artistic mediums. It's not really a question of gauging like how good or bad it is, but if everybody has the capacity for it, then there's something that makes me uniquely creative. I've just done it. Other people can do it. They just either choose not to, or they do it in a different way. Which, you know, because to me, the sense of like being creative also means that aspect of like being unique. And if it's just if we've come to the conclusion that a big aspect of our work and what we try to do as musicians is to just have forms of criticisms of structures, and everybody's already had that, right? We continuously criticize in our own minds. It may not be as in-depth, it may not be about certain things, but everybody has that capacity. So, you know, I don't really like to call myself creative as an artist, I guess. Like, what? So you said, do we consider ourselves like creative people or artists, right? I mean, like, obviously I would consider myself an artist, right? But my interpretation of art is so fluid that, you know, nearly everybody's an artist in their own right. I think it's something that's like really important for me and how I relate to what we do is my relationship towards what performance means, right? To me, performance is not about simply dramatizing, right? It's about being able to mobilize methods of action and dialogue that is usually shut off, right? So every speech that I give is itself a performance. Every conversation I have with a friend is itself is a performance, because there's that notion of like expressing, and I'm outwardly expressing so that other people can interpret that, right? And so everybody is an artist in their own right, in my opinion, or at least they occupy a space of performance. But I guess something that would probably take me further when it deals with a specific band like Proletariot, Chariot, like what we do, is being able to kind of intertwine that notion of like performance that we do within the everyday, and to create like versions of like avant-garde abstraction, so that we can create like different creative mediums that you cannot simply do through spoken word, right? I think something that's really important with us is, especially when we deal with notions of vibrations, there's always that aspect of like what we are communicating non-verbally, right? How do we make this space feel even when we don't say anything? The fact that, like, during that performance that Drew was talking about before, where we reenacted a scene of domestic violence, the most powerful aspect of that to me was never about what Drew was actually doing to himself when he was whipping himself with a belt. I thought the most powerful part of that performance, which was when all of that was done, what did the air feel like around the entire venue when everybody was literally dead silent? If there was a clock in there, you would have been able to hear the ticking. And I think that is like when we have been able to kind of like transcend a notion of just like everyday performance into an artistic performance, I guess. You know what I mean? Because something that's really important to me, at least, is to be able to have people kind of occupy a space of uncomfortability. I think that disruption is good. I think that is good to send people into modes and places where they feel a little bit uncomfortable, not like unsafe. There's a distinction in my mind, but something that just like, it's so different and it's just so sudden that it just kind of forces them to get outside of their safe box of intellectual thinking, and it like kind of puts them into a space of unknowingness. And so like, I know I've reached that when there is silence, or I've known I've reached that when people's bodies are literally looking like they're convulsing, or they look disgusted, or they're speechless, right? when they can't even have that notion of everyday performance because they don't know what else to do, right? That's when I know that there's been at least something that's a little more artistically defined with our stuff, I guess. But then again, like I said, we can talk for hours about justifications for artistic bullshit, but we're doing it for fun, and we do it because it's kind of funny to watch people falter like that.
Well, and also, I'm going to answer your question as well. I do agree with Alex. I mean, I wouldn't call myself a creative person, and for similar reasons. Because I mean, like Alex said, I mean, you could just as easily create something that makes a political or critical statement. And
it does it a lot more effectively than anything.
Yeah, you probably yeah exactly. But when it comes to art or being an artist, I mean, I definitely agree with the dramaturgical aspect of everything having the potential to be art. But at the same time, I mean, with that being said, I want to try and access, like through Proletariot Chariot, that paradigm of a pervasive artistic potential with everything, like say people's interactions or sounds, like ambient noise or visual stimuli that could be captured into a photograph or into a memory. All those things could be considered art. But when we have a unilateral type of representation of what art can be, usually what ends up happening is there ends up being a pretension that shrouds those things. Like say for instance, we've had interactions in the Kansas City DIY scene that have exhibited a type of proletarian pretension or a type of pretentiousness or ostentatiousness that is constituted because of the fact that they're trying to access lower culture, quote unquote. And that, to me, that type of hipsterism and that type of artistic expression is, to me, null and void and actually harmful because of the fact that it's trying to reappropriate bourgeois sensibilities with, quote unquote, lower class sensibilities. And it completely defeats the purpose when you have a unilateral conception of what art can be and trying to utilize that and create its own type of high art culture. I think that it defeats the point when you're trying to create ambient forms or organic forms of art that can happen every single day in every single way through recording conversations, through recording various forms of kinetic interactions, say with wind chimes or with the sound of traffic, all of those things.
Throwing around trash bags.
Yeah, or throwing in trash bags like we did in one show. But the thing is that people oftentimes try to reappropriate that into a pretentious high art setting, and that's not the point. The point is for us to be able to access, well, frankly, to access art that is accessible to us because of our surroundings.
Yeah, that's something that I find really important, right? That's what I mean when I say like flip the script. There are these like normative relationships that people have to notions of like art, right? Like not only when it deals with like class separation, but also like racial separation and everything. And so like there's a defined mechanism that people expect of you to do, right? Like we are college kids caught within Lawrence, Kansas, and we're white, and we listen to like all this like post-hardcore and emo-ish type music, and so people expect our performances to translate into that. And so when we break that notion, people end up trying to like react in a way where they say that like we're being pretentious, but to me, I think what we're simply doing is like using our form of cultural labor to try to dismantle systems on our own, right? If we are continuously being asked to inject labor and to inject ourselves so that we can defeat ourselves, we might as well like try to reorient those power dynamics so that we can dismantle those things. I will go into a bar and I will make people pay money so that they feel uncomfortable, and isn't that the fucking point? You know what I mean? I think that there's a lot of power within that, and so people can go all day about how pretentious we are. It's not like we go into like every fucking place and we talk the way that we're doing now and have justifications for our art. Every time somebody even asks me about our art, I usually just say, well, I don't fucking know, because I know they don't care. And quite frankly, I don't really either. The only reason I'm expressing this is because it's a formal setting and that this is meant to be an actual interview, and I guess I gotta give some sort of fucking justification. But that's why I'm like always ending these questions with like, at the end of the day, it really didn't fucking matter. You know, it just happened, and I don't really want to talk about it because it happened, and that's okay. Or maybe it's not okay.
Well, I don't know. I guess like the part of what I was trying to say before is like I was trying to cross apply what happened to us at the art closet with like the DIY scene trying to.
Oh yeah, you mean with God, what the fuck was their name? Kettle corn or
Yeah,
like.
oh my god! It was saltwater
Revival.
Saltwater sanctuary.
Yeah, they kept saying like kettle corn. Yeah,
Yeah.
kettle corn back.
Yeah. Well, the reason why I brought that up was specifically because of the fact that in a lot of DIY scenes, they try to utilize a lack of resources as a means of trying to promote a new high art culture, which is bullshit because it's trying to use, like I said before, a unilateral approach to art and make it high class or make it bourgeois, when clearly, if we're trying to access that same means of expression, we're not trying to reappropriate that into a similar structure. What we're trying to do is utilize those materials and try to make it so that it's accessible to people, or try to make a new form of artistic expression as opposed to trying to create a quasi-bourgeois version of, like, say, wearing ripped skinny jeans from a fucking thrift store, going to places like the Bourgeois Pig and talking about how I love sound collage music because it's so high art. That's bullshit. What we're trying to do is utilize those things and create a different context for them so that it's accessible.
Yeah, because there are a lot of people in the DIY scene that are like that. They pay for high-end coffee in places that aren't like Starbucks and for some reason believe they've escaped modes of capitalism. They're doing shit like that. Or they like go into places and they're able to like have high theoretical justifications for the shit they do. And at the end of the day, I always just gotta check them. I'm like, look, man, when you're working fucking 40 hours a week on minimum wage, do you think that people are actually really caring about the form of expression that you have? No, they're worried about their next fucking paycheck so that they can survive. That's what I mean when I said about how like we try to have our music express the space that we occupy. Like, we are fucking poor, but we at least had enough money to buy these instruments and to make this music. And we are here right now. And I think that us even being able to express that is itself a confession of like the power that we have and confession of the privilege that we have. But these like kids that occupy a lot of these DIY scenes seem to have it like wrong, where they think, hey, I'm dealing with my forms of like immateriality and that makes me somehow unique or special. And I'm like, what the fuck are you doing about it though? You know what I mean? Like, you literally ain't doing shit. So it like, don't have like this fucking air of pretentiousness about it, which is why I don't talk about my music, because it's like, at the end of the day, yeah, we open up a space where people can like politically criticize and that may be good, but we didn't do anything really either. We're the ones that come home with the money, and that's the joke.
Yeah, it's a laughing joke.
That's the form of irony that we have. Like, if we had to have some sort of sense of artistic envisioning, and the irony is that we pay people to see shit they do not like, and we run away happy because that was our job. That is the flipping of it.
So is this,
or at least that's my justification. Again, Drew and I are separate, and like while we work together, we're very similar in a lot of ways, but I think we also have pretty different ideological differences, and that might be something. Maybe Drew's got a way different relationship, but the funniest thing to me is like when I walk away with the money, when I walk away with people's time. That's something that like really makes me happy, because I don't know, fuck these people.
Well, I mean, I have a similar view on it. I mean, clearly, I mean, obviously everything's absurd, everything's a joke. I mean, Camus talked about that. Same with
Camus.
Well, I mean, same with, Pierre Bourdieu. I mean, they're like, the emergence of the 20th and 21st century, literally the only academic output that philosophy and social criticism has told us is that everything is more or less worthless and absurd, and that ideals don't actually exist. So yeah, at the end of the day, when we walk away with that cash, I mean, we just criticized capitalism. People threw money at us, and I feel really, really bad about it, because it's the only framework that I can access to actually express my art, and it makes me want to die.
okay. So, but is like making money or making a living out of this important to you? Or
No.
is just the acquisition of the money more important to the concept that you are going for?
Well, I mean, the acquisition of money is inevitable. I mean, if you're playing a show, most likely the venue is going to pay you for your time and also give you a cut of what they made at the bar and all that stuff. So, it's definitely not the operative goal that we have in mind. But at the same time, when we're performing and acquiring, ticket sales and all that stuff, there's really, like I said before, it's the only framework that we can actually access. Capitalism is the most inevitable framework that presides over us in a contemporary society because of the fact that it's the only economic model that we understand. We don't have collectivist models. We don't have socialist or Marxist models or anarchistic models of economics. We're stuck in capitalism.
But DIY scenes.
But that's the thing. So it's like if we're criticizing capitalism and we're stuck in capitalism, what are we supposed to do? Obviously, the goal for us is not to make a bunch of money and have a record deal and make the big bucks and go on a tour van, the RV, and tour the world. That's not really the goal. The goal is, for more selfish reasons, to do shit that we love to do. But, even with our qualms with capitalism and our qualms with structural violence and all these things, it's hard to escape because of the fact that it's such a prevalent framework that shrouds our reasoning and shrouds everyone's reasoning.
So, to add on to that, I have a different, or I have a conception of capitalism that goes beyond just the idea of like material money, right? Even when we go to places where it's free, right? We do a house show, or it's like, the venue just allowed us to just kind of take that space and they take like a $3 cover, none of it goes to us, right? What I'm saying is that people are like so indebted to capitalism, they believe the way in order to support us is to throw us more money. They're willing to buy our albums, they're willing to help us like get food, or it's just like, I'd like to pay you so that you can like do some shit for me for my project, right? That's like the cycle of capitalism, right? Even when a space does not demand for material money, people are still willing to give it out because they believe that's their only mode of support. Right. But also, to me, I think something that is true is that even if we did not walk away with a single scrap of fucking money, ways in which I've been able to take capital away from people is that aspect of time, right? If time is money, if time is productivity, I've been able to occupy their space and make them unproductive for literally an hour. And that's something that's important, right? That is a mode of like commodity to me, people's times and people's intellectual like power. If I'm able to divert that away from being able to prop up unhealthy structures and at least have a mode where they have forms of self-criticism, that is the way that I kind of flip capitalism in on itself. Because capitalism is not just about economic gains, about money, but it's also about notions of just labor and productivity that happen regardless of money.
Yeah, it's about, everything is quid pro quo, and capitalism definitely plays on that. Not even just the exchange of money, but the exchange of service, the exchange of time, the exchange of labor. So
that's why DIY scenes are caught up within capitalism too. They don't realize it. It's not just about money, it's about the justification we have to even create money in the first place, which is that idea of exchange. That idea of production. Which is why DIY kids are fucking pretentious in my mind. Because they think they've escaped a bunch of shit that they simply have not. That when they go home, they're going to go ahead and bitch and complain about how they still have no money.
But then they'll turn on Netflix and chill. So like that's...
Exactly. Or they'll turn on a fucking TV. Or they'll like, go ahead and go to their job where, they make a little more than minimum wage. And it's like, y'all don't understand that the ability for you to even have time to express that shit is a way in which I know that you're in a higher mode of like the capitalist privilege than a lot of other people. Art will always, like expressive art like we do will always be within a mode of like privileged space. The fact that people have the time to even watch, that's something that a lot of people do not have or can afford. You know what I mean?
Okay, so switching gears a little bit, this is going to be the final question, and it's a little more related to a common theme that I'm noticing with a lot of interviews I've been doing. Is there any generative influence to your work that existed in your childhood?
Well, I don't really remember my childhood. I didn't have like a bad childhood. It was kind of shitty, but a lot of kids' childhood is pretty shitty. I just don't really remember. I don't have the best of memory. But I guess if I was influenced through like my childhood, I guess that would have to be my father. Like my dad, he really liked music, and he's always been one of those people that kind of like instilled forms of political nihilism and apathy within me, where he's like, it doesn't matter who you vote for, it doesn't matter who's in power, the system's rigged. And so I guess he kind of like sowed the seeds to at least have me imagine that, like, you know, maybe shit isn't so squeaky clean like we like to believe it is. Maybe that's something that influences me. Like, I don't know. The biggest influence to me in the way that my art is expressed is my fucking, you know, my relationship to debate. But I don't want to talk about that. That shit's boring. Just know that I'm in an even more privileged academic circle than just, like, this fucking band. And I think helps influence this shit a lot. So, yeah. And Drew's obviously influenced by me. I'm just such a pretty boy that he just he just wants to do everything he can to please me, and it will never happen.
I mean, I bought you Taco Bell yesterday, so I mean,
I was really sick.
I know.
Thank you.
I mean, sure.
You're a pretty boy though.
I mean, you're pretty too. I mean, but just because that's the case doesn't mean that we can't have an objective conversation about art. This is art. What we're doing is art.
There's no doubt about that.
Right now.
There's literally no doubt.
No, I mean, I met Gwen Stefani the other day, and she told me that there was no doubt that what she did was art, and I take that. I take what she said, and I apply it to my life every day. Just no doubt.
Did that shit that she said make you go BANNANAS? How do you spell the name?
Okay, we can bullshit a lot in a second, but let's bullshit a little more first. So, Drew, do you have any generative experiences in your childhood that informs your art?
Yeah. I mean, the institution of the institution of the Protestant religion, as well as Southern antebellum culture, really did have a huge influence over what kind of expressions I access and how I articulate those points, as well as being stuck in a gratuitously conservative place. Growing up in places like Little Rock, or growing up on the Kansas side of Kansas City. I mean, like, there's a lot of frames of mind that end up being expressed, very violent frames of mind, like racist frames of mind, or Islamophobic frames of mind, or classist frames of mind, or all of these things that I have internalized over the years, especially my own internal dissonances with religion itself. Growing up, I was forced to go to church for the first 17 years of my life, and it's something, when you're 7 years old and you're having panic attacks about the apocalypse and about the rapture, and you can't sleep for days on end because of the fact that you're afraid that God isn't going to save you. I mean, that's the kind of thing that really does inform my art, is that constant state of anxiety and that constant state of trying to recover, even though you've been hurt in the past, and you'll never recover completely, but it's a process all the same that you have to go through.
There was never any religion in my household. My dad grew up Catholic, I think. I don't even know.
So he didn't have a religion, more or less.
I mean, he kind of did, but it was like, whatever. I'm pretty sure he's agnostic, kind of like I am, but I never asked those questions. So that's why, like, the childhood, I guess, isn't really that much of a memory for me, because there was no, like, my family was just so kind of disjuncted, and I guess the way, like, regardless of whether they purposely parented like that or not, and my brother was the way he was to me, whether that was on purpose or not, there was just not a lot of, like, ideological, like, direction that happened. It was just kind of like an open space. The more that I think about my childhood, the more that I realize that, like, I guess the kind of ideology that was instilled in me was like an idea of like post-racial relationships where like everybody's the fucking same. that's like that nihilistic frame of mind. Like, it doesn't matter who you are, you're probably shitty. That's probably a little violent, and that's kind of something I get kind of personally attached to. Yeah, there's no religion. There's never any pressures like that. I'm trying to think. Oh yeah, the customer's always right. Yep. My dad was the restaurant manager. Customer's always right. I still believe that to this day. If you think that's wrong, then fuck you. You're a jerk and you're not my friend.
Yes, absolutely.
Cool. Well, thank you for your time, gentlemen.
Well, thank you. Yes, thank you for
Thank you for taking the time to interview me. I'm very glad that we could take the time to interview each other.
Next up, we're going to have a little bit of a reading from one of Camus's new books.
This is Prairie Home Companion.